Hi, this is Miss Lancaster here. Um, just a quick video regarding chapter 8, kind of check in and give you some idea of what you should be focusing on while you are reading this chapter. Keep in mind, this chapter is within the inequality section and it's talking about race and ethnicity as lived experiences. So it really is about dominant minority group relationships, thinking back to like when we talk about in sociology, a dominant and minority relationship has more to do with power than with numbers. So the dominant group is that group that has the most power and influence. Minority groups are separate from that. Okay, so a minority group is oftentimes distinguishable from the dominant group. It's excluded, denied full participation. They have less power and access to resources. Oftentimes stereotyped, ridiculed, defamed, whatever it takes, condemned in some way in order to be treated, for culture to actually accept that differences. Okay, so recognizing that there is an inequality in the way our system is structured is really, really important. So when we talk about dominant minority relationships, thinking about the power and the influence that exists in society is really important. So recognizing race, though, and ethnicity as social constructs is something that I really want you to take away from this chapter. So when we talk about a social construct, it is how society creates meaning and gives meaning. Therefore, there is a meaning to the situation. Okay, so race is ultimately the biological differences that we see, or those perceived biological differences. There is no real genetic marker for race. There's just genetic markers for all the various different things that shape our racial expression and the way that we appear. But those, again, are socially constructed and connected that way. It is socially defined category based on real or perceived biological differences between groups of people or categories of people, ultimately. It can be a combination of our appearance, such as our skin color, our shade of our skin, the stature, facial features, hair color, and texture, head forms, nose shape, eye color. Those are all things that can shape how we see race. But ultimately, it is still a social construct. Ethnicity is also a socially defined category in which there are common language, religion, cultural differences, right? It's a cultural factor. So, an ethnic group is a group that you are a member, a category that you are a member of based on a shared cultural heritage. Again, socially defined, socially created, a social construction. Okay, being in either of these positions as a racial status or your ethnic status can shape whether or not you're part of the dominant group or a part of a minority group. When you're going through ethnicity and looking at that, make sure that you understand symbolic and situational ethnicity. These are factors of ethnicity that shape, that are really kind of how we reinforce or live our ethnic categories. Um, Other things to think about as we're going through, we could talk about racism in general, but that word is not something that I like to kind of focus on because many people think of racism as a micro level thing, but it is definitely a macro structural level factor in which there are systems in place where one category of people or one group of people benefit while others are at a disadvantage. So we really need to kind of think about how we get to that macro level. So recognizing the differences between stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Ultimately, institutional level discrimination is what racism is, but individual acts of bigotry are deeply embedded in that idea of racism to begin with. So, a stereotype is a categorization of a large number of people by that are kind of distorted, oversimplified, or exaggerated ideas passed down from one generation to the next. Where a prejudice is an attitude or a prejudgment, a belief usually oftentimes related to the stereotypes, but it's kind of gives you this general expectation of what you think is going to be like, and then discrimination is the actual action based on a prejudice. So when we really think about it, stereotypes can lead to prejudice, which can then lead to discrimination. Individual discrimination is quite different than institutional discrimination, because individual discrimination, while it is problematic, it is on an individual basis. And everybody has the potential to be discriminated against on an individual level. However, if you are part of a minority group, regardless of which minority group we talk about, when we will talk about various things, right? With chapter 7, we talked about income. Chapter 8, we're talking about race and ethnicity. Chapter 9, we're going to be talking about sex, gender, and sexuality. Regardless of what your dominant minority group relationship is, you have a much greater chance of receiving institutional level discrimination if you are part of the minority group. Okay, so individual discrimination, institutional discrimination. Racism, of course, is the attitude or belief or institutional arrangement, and that institutional arrangement is an extremely important piece of it. If an institutional arrangement favors any racial category over another, that is what racism is. Okay, so recognizing that is extremely important. In the book, you'll be reading about white privilege and reverse racism. What exactly is privilege? Privilege is an unearned advantage, okay? So recognizing that if I am part of the dominant group, and when we talk about race, we really need to focus on the fact that if you are white, you are part of the dominant group. That does not mean that you have advantages in every situation, because if you are poor and white, you are at a disadvantage based on your income, okay? But your racial category puts you in a dominant group. So recognizing that privilege is something that is deeply embedded in our lives, and race can shape that. Make sure that you're going through the theories and understand those. Functionalism and conflict theory, both are very similar in the reality of discussing how your racial or ethnic category can shape how you are treated at that macro level. Symbolic interactionism, of course, is discussing really the symbols that we've attached to race. Think about life chances. As I've mentioned previously, when we talk about life chances, these are just the opportunities that we have, and depending on who I am and how I'm seen based on my variety of statuses, I can have different life chances, and my racial category can shape the opportunities that I may or may not have. The last part that your book really kind of gets into is race relationships, such as genocide, population transfer, colonialism. These are all factors that you should probably look into and make sure that you understand how basically the interactions between dominant and subordinate groups really take various forms. A key thing to keep in mind is in society, you have the dominant group, and then you have lots of different minority groups. And all of these groups, from a conflict perspective, are in conflict or competition with one another. But from a functionalist perspective, the only way society could truly work is if everybody works together for stability and harmony. So just kind of thinking about that as you're reading through it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great day.